My great friend Jean-Anne Crowley pointed me in the direction of my next guest a couple of weeks ago. She said, check this gentleman out, Richie. He's a corporate solicitor, lawyer, and a businessman. And he's very articulate. He's very interesting. He's got a really kind of interesting perspective on what's happening in Ireland right now, economically and politically. So I had a look, and she was right. And it seems that this coming... Well, it might be this year, it might be very early next year, but Ireland will soon have a general election, and he's going to run for TD, Chocta Dola. Got to look it up if you're not Irish, and in Dublin Bay South, and I'm delighted to say that he's agreed to come on the programme for a bit of a kind of a state of the nation analysis. Nick Delehanty, you're very welcome. How are you?
Hey Richie, thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You made my day about 30 seconds ago. I'll tell you why. Only Irish people will get this. I said hello to Nick on WhatsApp to make sure he was there. And guess how he responded? He responded, well. Do you know what, Nick? Nobody greets me well over here in Salford. It's always, all right, mate, but well. Listen, it's an absolute honour. Why is a successful corporate lawyer, and you have been very successful, and businessman, why the hell would you bring it on yourself to go into politics?
Yeah, so look, I was a solicitor. I did it for 10 years. I was working with the big firms in Dublin here and getting on great. And, I saw in a way, the inner workings of the belly of the beast in many ways of corporate Ireland and, very efficient tax structures. And you'll hear in the news about vulture funds and things like that. And I was kind of setting those up. And the more I did it, and the more I looked at it, I realized, I don't know if I kind of agree with all this, with my green jersey, Ireland hat on. I don't know if this is the best thing that Ireland is doing. And if we can, I'd like to think long term, and if we do this for another 20 years, what will happen? So during COVID, COVID was a big wake up call for everyone because everyone paused and had to took stock. And during COVID, I started making a few videos on YouTube and started a YouTube channel, and then I realized once it was time to go back into the office, this mightn't sit well with our clients. So I was like, Jesus, if I want to continue saying this stuff, I'm going to have to find another job. So and I kind of knew in the back of my head, well, politics would be the answer. So in the meantime, there wasn't going to be an election for 4 years. In the meantime, I set up a completely different business, a doggy daycare business, just to pay the bills. Because I believe if you want to be an independent politician, you must be first financially independent. So that business is going great. It's ticking over. I love dogs, and it's feel good. But it gives me the freedom to say what I want online and just be very truthful, and I don't have to look over my shoulder at who's going to fire me. If my clients don't like what I'm saying, they don't have to send their dog to me. And so it's a complete chalk and cheese change, but it just gives me the leverage to use my corporate experience for public good.
Can we roll back to something? I could not go back to this. First of all, I'm amazed with the doggy daycare. We're dog lovers in my house as well. We have two. So congrats on that business, and I hope it goes from strength to strength. But I want to go back to vulture funds because I'm always acutely aware when I focus on a specific country or specific city. This programme is lucky. It has listeners in lots of different countries. And I'm not bragging when I say that, but the reason I'm saying it is because I want our listeners overseas to understand that what Nick is going to talk about, it pertains to you. This is everything that's going on at the moment is going on pretty much in lockstep everywhere else. It isn't just unique to Ireland. I want to go back to vulture funds because I would have covered many times over the years with activists in Ireland and elsewhere. For me, the awful spectre of people's homes being repossessed, and in many cases, I would say illegally. And then major companies or organisations or groups of companies or financial interests, we'll say vulture funds, were able to come and buy up those houses. For me, that's a national scandal, no matter where it happens. So I want to go back to it. You said you had some involvement in this as a solicitor. You would have come up against this. And was that something that began to not sit right with you? Did you begin to think tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I was a corporate solicitor in Ireland, and it went really well. Now, I only speak very highly of my experience in these firms. It gave me the training and knowledge that I now use. But Ireland went through a very bad time. Like it's easy now to forget how bad the effects of the crash were in Ireland in 2011, 2013, and so on. And so, like, I like to steel man my position, the opposite side of my position sometimes. So at that time, we had decent politicians at the time, and they decided that the best course of action was to allow these vulture funds. So vulture fund is basically a big, massive American private equity house to come in, set up very tax efficient structures and buy all these bad assets being, mortgages that weren't performing, houses, people's homes. And they would buy the bad loan books from the banks that had to be bailed out. And at the time, look, it was a very controversial thing, but at the time, people were like, look, maybe this is the only solution. So at the time, I was happy. I knew what was going on. I was like, look, this is drastic. It's the way it was. It's just the way it is. But it's only when you realize that one point in time has now had a snowball effect. And where we are now, 10 years later, we are in a position to get rid of these types of entities out of the country, but we're not doing that. We are just incentivizing them to double down into other areas, and they're not leaving. So we invited them in. They may have had, you can argue both sides of whether they were good at the time. That's okay. But I'm saying right now, we need to wise up and sort ourselves out and put Irish people first.
So these vulture funds, yeah, I mean, I would be, with my politics being very old school socialist trade unionist, but if I could leave even those to one side, like I covered this stuff extensively, I know that there was incredibly bad, even illegal behaviour going on with in terms of the mortgage lenders, in terms of how they were putting people out of these homes. So Irish men and women, and you and I are Irish, it's in our bone marrow to want to own our own houses. And what the banks did was basically conspired, in my opinion, with the political class to put Irish people out of their homes and give their homes to these vulture funds. And look, you're right, we could argue about this all day long, but here's what's really important. You're saying that these entities are still hanging around in Ireland. Explain that to, you did a very good tweet the other day about explaining it to a 5-year-old. Think of me as a 5-year-old, Nick. How does that look in 2024? What does it mean on the ground?
Yeah, well, I like to steelman the position just as well, but you are totally right. What happened was a disgrace to the Irish people in the end. Like, there was the tracker mortgage scandal, that the assignment of these bad mortgages to these funds is still being disputed in the courts. And, you can get really technical on it, and do they have the ownership? So it was a giant disgrace, but there was a decision taken at the time. So how they have not gone away is the same entities that came in here and bought up all these bad assets, they were called vulture funds. But what we did was we legalized for these super tax efficient structures that are called ICAPs, right? And it's just basically a type of company, tax transparent, isn't subject to tax. And what's happened was there's been mission creep. So since kind of 2015, these entities were allowed by these bad loan books. Then they were like, well, now we actually wouldn't mind buying all these brand new houses over there. And we're going to buy that whole new estate that you've built, and you're going to sell them off individually to Mary and Pat. But we're going to buy the whole lot, and we'll just rent them out. And the way things are structured are, we won't have to pay any tax on our rent because we're tax efficient, and we'll wire the money through Cayman and wherever else, and we'll get it all tax free. And you're like, okay, that's pretty bad. And then they were like, okay, what we'll do here, we'll buy this group of houses and we'll lease them back to the council, basically the government, and the government will pay us for these. And these types of funds, it became known as a vulture fund, and then they became known as cuckoo funds. And there was outrage and uproar over this in 2018. And there was new taxes brought in, a stamp duty tax, to try and prevent these entities from buying like 200 houses in one go. They brought in a 10% stamp duty tax, and that was just, a speed bump to these guys. They were like, yeah, grand, we'll pay that and we can just continue on. But what's happened now? So again, people will argue that, look, we need these guys to finance the building of these projects. And there's arguments for and against. And
well, give me one argument. Hang on, this is really good. What is the argument for allowing an international vulture fund come in and hoover up all of this real estate. How could the government say we can't afford to build them? Why can't the Irish government, and look, I kind of think I know the answer, but for our listeners who don't know, what would be stopping any government, let's just focus exclusively on Dáil Éireann, the Irish government, why couldn't they decide we're going to build 200,000 houses for low-income families and we're going to provide the money for? Why couldn't they do that?
Well, they can do that, and they should be building more social housing on public land. They 100% should be doing that. But the reason just why some of these entities kind of have a reason to exist, like I don't believe in just an outright ban. It's about trimming back and carefully molding. Like if you want a high spec apartment block in the center of a city and that's rentable, it BTR, built to rent. And I toss and turn over this in my head, but there are areas where people want to rent a really nice apartment in the center of the city, and the incentive is that these guys will come along and they'll build the whole thing, and because they're going to stick around and rent out the units, it gives them an incentive to build the unit right, so that their upkeep costs, their own upkeep costs are low, and then to stick around
and manage them and manage these units forever for thereafter. Manage the ground rent and all of that. But the flip side argument to this is, Nick, that if the state builds them, the state is going to earn the rental income and it's going to be able to spend it elsewhere, maybe on hospitals or I don't know, on education.
Yeah. So the state should be building on public land and doing more of that, 100%. But they don't do it because, in my view, they don't do it because they want, you can get conspiratorial about this if you want, and you can say that homes have become a financial asset and they are just managing the supply. Similar, I kind of use the analysis of De Beers and diamonds. The way diamonds are like the biggest scam in the world, but they manage the control of diamonds to keep the price high. And similar with Irish housing. If you look up if you go to the annual meeting of the two biggest builders in Ireland, Cairn and Glenveagh, they will literally say, they'll project out the next 10 years and say, we've got a steady supply of 4 to 7% growth, and this is really good and manageable, and it's all controlled. So the state should 100% be doing this. But now let's just move away from this, and I'll get to tell you where I have completely, I can steel man both sides, right? But now I can no longer sit around and steel man the next part of this whole puzzle. And that is these same entities, these ICAVs, tax efficient, are now operating the asylum centres and refugee camps, basically.
Yeah,
right. Now, this is outrageous. And I deliberately steel man the other arguments just so that I can emphasize how wrong this one is, because there is no argument for this. So what has happened, and I will talk you through one particular case. There was a builder, I won't name his name, who got bailed out during the crash to the tune of 45 million. Taxpayers' money bailed him out. He goes along and he sets up one of these new structures, and he uses it to buy, he gets money and he buys an old paint factory in one of the most deprived areas in Dublin, in Coolock, North Dublin. And because of new radical planning laws, emergency accommodation, I'm using bunny ears and inverted commas here, emergency accommodation laws, there now no longer needs to be any planning permissions or planning processes to set up an asylum centre. So any vacant building in the entire country, basically any apartment block, office or stable, can be turned into an asylum centre without any planning permission. So this guy buys a paint factory, an old paint factory in Coolock, and gets a contract to put 500 asylum seekers in there. And he will get paid, once this is up and running, about 4 million every 3 months. I don't know that exact figure, but based on other similar sizes, an enormous amount of money to house asylum seekers in the most deprived area of Dublin without planning permission through an incredibly tax efficient structure that used to be known as a vulture fund. So, all these people are going to come in, live in this area. There's going to be no services, And the guy who's making all the money from it, who's already been bailed out for 45 million by the taxpayer, is not going to pay any money back. And he, just to finish the point, he went on, RTE did a program last week, and I fell off my chair when this guy appeared on the TV as a victim. He said that he had to leave Ireland because of threats to his life, but in reality, he had to leave Ireland because he's a tax exile and is now living in Portugal. It was, and so now we're on to, why was he on RTE, the government and RTE, and it just becomes a rabbit hole of like this. This is a thread. Once you pull on, you realize it's all systematic.
It's systemic and systematic. You're listening to Nick Delehanty. Nick is a corporate solicitor, a corporate lawyer, business owner, start-up politician, as he's referred to himself. He will be running in Dublin Bay South in the next election. What he has said there, every word of it is true. Because I've gone over it backwards and forwards to make it more interesting, to get stuck into Nick and say, look, but he's absolutely right what he has explained there, that these ICAP holders, these groups, they can now buy up any building in Ireland, any building that isn't being used, any property, take ownership of it, declare it to be an asylum centre for asylum seekers, and then rinse the state for enormous amounts of money while paying no tax whatsoever. And it's fair to say, isn't it? Sorry, next to no tax. It's fair to say, Nick, that the media back home is not talking about this.
Oh no way. They won't touch this. They literally won't touch this because it's all entrenched. Like, Ireland's very small. This has been government policy, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil. And like, I would have grown up in a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael house. Most of my friends are Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil. And, the loyalty can be a bad thing sometimes because it's to your detriment. So I'm going against the grain calling this out, but the media won't call it out. RTE just got a €750 million bailout from the government. So they're in bed with the government. RTE aren't going to talk about this. And it can be kind of complicated to go and burrow down and look at this. So a lot of politicians are just kind of figuring it out. And, I've coined the phrase, the immigration industrial complex. It's not that big of a phrase, but it's now becoming part of the lexicon, and it has been raised in the Dáil. So the more I push it, the more it's getting highlighted. But everyone knows, like literally the whole country knows that what's going on is a scam. But it's being able to kind of pinpoint the laws and the way they're doing it is the key. And just today or yesterday, the budget was released. And when you dig into the inner workings of the technical documents of the budget, you realize that the government for the last few years had temporary spending, and all this temporary spending, emergency spending for the Ukraine war, as billions of it has been going towards asylum centres and things like that. And they've covered it up, and they've done some funny accounting and just covered up last year's 4.5 billion worth of spending. And I'm like, how can they do it? So people call out the immigration, but I'm calling out the immigration industrial complex. It's the money and the scam that I'm after, not
This
so
is
much
very good. It's very good. Look, I have enormous sympathy, and I'm a Bolivarian socialist if I'm anything, right? I live in an area where there's a fairly sizable Muslim population, third, fourth generation. I love it. I have no issues with it whatsoever. I lived abroad myself. I feel terrible for people in villages and towns back home when a hotel is taken over somehow, or someplace where which was an asset to the community is now all of a sudden being used to house a couple of hundred people. And I do not other. And most of the people on this programme who've complained about that, they do not other the migrants, and I'm proud of them for that. Their bone to pick with is, public services have been decimated. It is insane to bring 200-300 people into a village. It's madness. So that's important, and that's a big deal. What you're doing is absolutely vital. You're saying that this is a far bigger story than most people even can contemplate. That you what did you call it there? The complex, the immigration
industrial complex.
So these funds then that want to buy these buildings to kit them out for the provision of putting asylum seekers in there, it's not a stretch of the imagination, if they've got a lot of money, these people, that they must be lobbying politicians when it comes to migration policy.
Oh yeah, totally. And you started this by saying it's not just Ireland and it's across the
board.
Other countries. If you zoom out and look at big hotel groups like Travelodge and some of the others, like if you take their figures on a European level, across France, Spain, the UK, and how much they're earning from the immigration industrial complex, like they're building new hotel, like in some cases they're building brand new hotels just to put asylum seekers in them, and they're just hundreds of millions a year are going to this. Now, it's not, I don't want to just say it's not just funds. Like there are local Irish business people that have been offered, the use of their hotel to this. And like, in some ways you can't blame them for taking the money, but it's getting to the stage where we're going to have to start blaming them, because it's becoming such a social issue.
It's a shock. It's a shock. Thank you for saying what you just said there, by the way. There are lots of people in the hotel business. Hospitality has never been more difficult than it is now to turn over a euro, to make a few quid. So of course when the local authority comes in and says we'll pay you ongoing, forevermore, if you close it down to the public and open it up, it's not ideal, but you can understand why they do it. So this is going on at the same time. So this is a perfect storm then, really.
Oh yeah, it's there's a quote I literally live my life by, or live my, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
And this is all incentives, and our incentives are completely aligned in the wrong direction. And it is for the manipulation of the taxpayer and the sale of or down the river of Irish hardworking people. That's what it is. To get to the biggest centre in Ireland is City West Hotel, which is structured like what I said, under an ICAF. In 2016, the revenues for City West, total revenue for the year was 22 million. And the profit was 1.5 million on that. And now the revenues, because it's an asylum centre, the revenues are above 100 million a year, and we don't know what the profits are, and we don't know what the costs are, because there's no transparency on this type of structure. But all we can assume is it's not running as a hotel anymore, so there's no room service. There's no bus boys bringing your bags up for you.
Yeah.
It's just. But there could be more people in it, who knows. But I'd love a breakdown of the costs. And like, if you're going to profit from an asylum centre, it should be the most transparent. We should be able to know exactly where every penny is spent, and it should be, every profit should be made should be taxable at the same rate as me and my doggy daycare business.
Absolutely.
Who's paying the VAT, who's doing all the work, hiring honest people. And I'm not getting any tax deals. So that's the real problem here. I would have much less of a problem with the immigration stuff if everyone was paying their fair share.
You're listening to Nick Delehanty. Now, Nick is a corporate lawyer. These days he's running his own business, a doggy daycare business. It's doing really well. He's been in that world for a decade. He'll run in Dublin Bay South later this year, or early. Well, it'll be early next year. It won't be later this year. Look, you mentioned conspiratorial. I know you're not stupid. You've obviously done your homework on this programme. So I'm going to say this, right? I interviewed a man 15 years ago, a man called John Perkins. He wrote a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he talked about working for the World Bank. His job, and the jobs of others, was to basically to get nation states into debt so that they could be asset stripped. I'm going to argue this. I know this is very black and white and it's a more complex issue. Again, and I'm a lefty, I'm not a conservative. Hasn't the European Union done that very thing, the ECB, in the last 15 years? Hasn't it given unimaginable loans to European Union countries that could never be paid back, that were never meant to be paid back, so that we could eventually see scenarios? I mean, we didn't even mention NAMA, the National Assets Management Agency, which was basically selling off Ireland's crown jewels to pay off a debt that the people of Ireland never incurred. Do you have any sympathy with that conspiracy theory I've just given you there?
Of NAMA?
No, just the whole, Europe, supranational organisations basically putting a debt on countries so that they could asset strip the countries later on.
Yeah, like you can argue that point. You know, the other argument will be like the European Union is trying to maintain monetary policy, but like people will say that Ireland entering into the euro in the first place is what basically caused the crash because our interest rates weren't aligned to what was needed for Ireland at the time. And you can go down that road. Was it deliberate? Was it not? I like to hold both positions in my head because, you know, to assume it was all planned, you know, you're giving people a lot of credit for their ability to organize and execute a plan, or is it just a load of people not paying attention and just hell is paved with road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
So there's different things at different stages where I'm like, what's going on here? Like when you look at the Irish, to zoom in a bit, we look at the Irish government and our current Minister for Justice or Minister for Finance are very young, not very much experience. And I'm like, they're not evil people. Like they're not conspiring around a table. They want to do good, but maybe they're not able to see the bigger picture of what you're talking about, which is, you know, economic hitmen or bigger lobby groups or strategies that are imposed.
Can I interject, Nick? Can I interject there? And this is not me talking out to our listeners. Yeah. Look, our listeners will scream at me if I don't say to you, you are obviously very, very bright, right? Like my previous guest, you're incredibly bright, you're very sharp. Some of our listeners will say, Nick, it's a bit disingenuous of you to suggest that Ireland's political class are unaware of the consequences that their policies are having on the people on the highways and byways of our country. They must know these policies. Open door migration, allowing these things are devastating people. While they're cutting public services, they can't be stupid, Nick.
I'll tell you, I was at a thing the other week and I met a fella and he had buildings around Dublin City. He works for a family office and the buildings are vacant. And this guy, I thought he was a smart guy. And he goes, oh yeah, we're going to try, and they tried other options. The only thing left to them was to try and turn these into asylum centers. And he looked at me dead in the face and he said, you know, because of climate change, these are all climate refugees from Bangladesh. And I nearly burst out laughing at him. I was like, are you serious? Like, but I couldn't, I was in a formal setting, so I just kind of took it. And what I learned from that was like, you'd be amazed the way some people can trick themselves or believe the narrative that's out there when their profit or, you know, their pocket is based on that being true. So, you know, I live on Twitter all day and I understand the world, but I think some of these politicians and some people, you know, they actually don't see it.
That's fair enough.
So I know what you're saying. Maybe some of them do. Like there are obviously some that do, but I toy with this idea in my head quite a lot.
And that's a very good answer. Look, I'm like you. I've always made room on this programme for every argument, and I try to hold fire when it comes to the personal opinions. You always leave room for, you know, that you might be wrong, you mightn't have gotten it right. Whether they know, whether they don't, whether they're in on it or not, the fact is these things are happening. This work you're doing, exposing this, what you've called it, this immigration industrial complex, is hugely important. You're listening to Nick Delahanty. Jesus, the time is flying. It's 20 to the top of the hour. We've got Nick for 10 to 12 more minutes. Can I ask you about something else you've been tweeting about? We'll certainly have common ground here, because again, this is a lockstep thing right across the world, I think, and that is governments telling us that they really need to do something about misinformation online, and we need to have bills. And you're very concerned about this, aren't you, from the point of view of freedom of expression and free speech. Tell us about what we understand the Irish government is planning around censorship online.
Yeah, well, there's a new hate speech bill being proposed, and it's been kicked around like political football at the moment, because they were all gung-ho to bring this in about a year ago. And then they got such a knock in the referendum, they realised that the tides were against them. So they've shelved it for now because there's an election coming up. But very disingenuously and politically stupidly, they've come out and said that they've literally said we're only shelving it for now, and once we're back in, we'll revisit the idea. And what this does, this hate speech crap, like what is hate speech? Like what is just nasty speech? Like what's the difference? What is just bad speech? There's a real lack of definitions here, and if someone assaults someone of a minority, let's say they're gay or something, and someone punches them, but then the same person punches someone who's not gay, the fellow who punched the gay fella is now going to be likely to serve a longer sentence because of that. And it makes no sense. It's like aggravated attack because of the hateful intent, and it's just like it goes down a real nasty avenue. And then this bill that they're proposing has these gender there's sections in it that give clarification to 11 different types of gender and things like that. They might try and strike that out. I think that might be going. But one of the funny things I always talk about with this is that the reason they're bringing this in is because they say that the current hate speech laws in Ireland are based on 1989 laws, and what they say is, they're outdated and we need to update them. And I find that funny, and I use that against them. I was like, well, what are our current asylum seeker laws based on? And they're based on 1950 Geneva Convention. I'm like, can we update those ones? Right. And I was like, no, we can't update those ones, but we must update these ones. And I'm like, it's just such a contradiction. It's not intellectual honesty, and anything got to do with restricting speech. Ireland already has very harsh hate speech laws at the moment. Like defamation in Ireland is huge. I am very vocal on Twitter, and some people have said to me, you need to calm it down because you're going to be sued. And it's just such a wrong thing. I think freedom of speech is crucial to a functioning democracy.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I remember when I started hearing terms like vulnerable groups and protected characteristics, and this is years ago. And as a free speech absolutist, I mean, over the years I've had some awful people on. I've interviewed people like David Duke, people who genuinely believe that black men and women are stupid and that Jews are evil. But I've had them on to challenge them and to have a go at them and have a pop and what have you.
Yeah.
I began to hear these terms over the years, protected characteristics, and it's never really about protecting anybody. It's about disempowering people, isn't it? Taking their power away from them. Because you and I can have a conversation, and you can have a proper pop at any of my beliefs or my views on geopolitics or otherwise, and I can come back at you. I don't need to be protected from you not agreeing with me or not liking me even, or thinking there's something wrong with me. But it all comes down to control. You probably won't have seen this, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. It's completely off script, this, but it's about the Metropolitan Police in London and Mark Rowley. You might have read this morning. They're going to move away from physical policing into live facial recognition. And they're saying, Nick, and this will be in Dublin, it'll be in Cork, it'll be in Waterford, it'll be in Galway. They're saying that after years of issues with these live facial recognition softwares, which were giving false positives, and it looks at Nick Delehanty in Croke Park and it thinks it's somebody else. It's nearly perfect now with artificial intelligence. And they're going to put it everywhere. And it'll link into everything through smart technology. So it'll link into dash cams, doorbell cameras at football matches, cameras near traffic islands in the middle of Dublin. This is dystopian, isn't it? In the extreme. There won't be a place, a square inch of the earth, where I might meet you because you're going to sell me your old bicycle. And I've got 20 quid that I want to get rid of and you want to get rid of a bike. And we won't be able to do it, Nick. This stuff is real, isn't it? It's coming, like. It's getting ever more dystopian, isn't it? Life in general, wherever you look.
Yeah, well, like if you don't already believe that everything you say is on WhatsApp or when you're near your phone is recorded, you're being naive. Like, I kind of accept these things. I think the facial recognition thing, it's already in China. It gives power, so much power back to government, and that's why we need to be digging in as much as we can at every possible moment to make sure that those people in government are accountable and are calling the shots, and that it just doesn't keep leaking away to civil service to do this. Like I tweeted about this yesterday. There's a new bill coming into Ireland. It'll come in next year if it passes, which it will, about cyber security. They're framing it as, but in that it gives the Irish government NSA-like powers to monitor people without their consent. And one of the lines in it is based on their political views. And this is why they keep saying far right, far right, far right. They just want to create, an enemy because, he was far right, so we were able to spy on his laptop or whatever. It's very dystopian, and it reminds me of the famous quote or thing with Peter Thiel, and he gave three possible scenarios for Europe. One was Europe becomes radical Muslim Sharia law. Two was it becomes Greta Thunberg green degrowth climate change ideology, and the third one was it becomes AI dystopian future. And I actually think all three are competing for each other for each possible outcome at the moment. And I don't if you were to pick between either of those, what would you pick?
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a final question before I do. And Nick, this is obviously live, but it will be podcasted, so I will put links to you on the podcast notes a bit later on. We're chatting today with Nick Delehanty, an Irish lawyer, a corporate lawyer and businessman. Love the doggy daycare. A lot of comments on that coming through, by the way. And Nick will run for Dáil Éireann in the next election cycle, Dublin Bay South. So my final question, I should have asked it earlier on. Look, if I'm right and Ireland is a vassal state of the European Union and much or most of its law is derived from its membership of the European Union, what can you do? What can a guy like you with the best will in the world, who's prepared to talk about the things you've talked about today, which are vitally important, how can you make a difference in that setup?
Yeah. So personally, what can I do? So I'm running as an independent in a very hot race. My chances, I'm going to need every bit of luck and publicity I can to get in. But once I get in, I'll be an independent. So I hope to be able to hold the parties to proper account by questioning, being on public accounts committees. But that's one of my initial goals as an independent. But what I'm really interested in is working with other independents across the country. And there's a lot of back channeling going on. We're talking to each other. And the aim is to try and create a new offering to people. Because since Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have become basically a uniparty, that has actually been one of the most detrimental things to Ireland and will continue to be for the next 20 years, because they used to, in some way, keep each other in check. But now they've become a uni-party and there is no effective opposition. The opposition we have is totally useless, totally useless. And they're captured by their ideologies. They're not practical. And so that's my goal. I'm only one person, but there are so many other people out there getting on to me and independent politicians that want to team up and join up. So even if I don't get in this time round, I'm not going away. This might take 10 years for fruit to come out of it. But so that's it. But you have to be able to have the confidence to go and do this and realize that these big movements manifest over a long period of time.
Folks, you've been listening to Nick Delehanty. I've said Delahunt once or twice. Apologies for that, Nick. I'm a clown. I'm an idiot. It's not as if I'm not experienced 25 years in the game. It's Nick Delehanty. I'm going to put links to Nick's Twitter and to his... there are lots of links. What do they call that when you have links? What do they call that? I've got it here in front of me now. I don't have a LinkedIn. And yeah, I'll put your LinkedIn on there as well. Nick Delehanty. On Twitter, he is Nick_Delehanty. Delehanty. Give him a follow him, pay attention to him. He's doing you are doing great work, mate, on that immigration situation. Jesus, that's massive, isn't it? Where that's going to end. But I really do appreciate your time today. Thanks for doing it. You're welcome to come back anytime you want. And
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll come back on before the election. How about that?
I'd love that. That'd be great.
Thanks very much, Nick. Nick Delehanty, a corporate lawyer, formerly, a decade experience. He's now in business for himself. He's got a doggy daycare business. You couldn't get further apart, could you, from corporate law? It sounds brilliant. And he will be running in Dublin Bay South next election. Nick Delehanty. Yes, I've been unwell, that's what it is. It's Delehanty. Lovely guy, lovely to meet him today. Plenty of your messages, thank you for them. I'm going to read some of them in a moment, but before I do that, I'm going to do this. You're listening to Wednesday's Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Seoul.
It has been a long, dull summer, and very few of us have built up sufficient reserves of vitamin D. During autumn and winter, it is essential that you strengthen your immune system, and as we all know, vitamin D3 plays an essential role in this. Immunex 365 is our unique formulation that combines effective levels of D3, C and K2, as well as zinc and quercetin. This unique combination of nutrients ensures efficient bioavailability of D3, thereby giving your immune system an optimum boost. Take back your health with just 2 capsules of Immunex 365 every day. For your peace of mind, all NutriHealth 365 orders come with free 2-day track delivery. Go to NutriHealth365.com to get yours now. That's NutriHealth365.com.
Ask not what the BBG can do for you, but what you can do for the BBG. Support the Richie Allen Show now at richieallen.co.uk.
Yes, welcome back, Nick Delehanty. Thank you to Nick, and thank you to Annette Friedrichsen, who was on the programme in the first hour. And thank you for all of your messages. Wayne came back to say, won't be in Ireland in 20 years if this continues. Of course, that's just my opinion. Mark is in the Caribbean. He says, it's amazing how what is wrong becomes right when there is money on the table. Andy reached out to me. Andy, I didn't see this in time. Ask Nick if he knows about the Clyward Piven plan. Well, I'm going to be honest with you, because honesty is the only policy in broadcasting. I never heard of this. It's the Clyward Piven strategy, a political strategy from the 1960s by American sociologists Richard Clyward and Francis Fox Piven. The strategy aimed to utilise militant anti-poverty groups to facilitate a political crisis by overloading the welfare system via an increase in welfare claims. Funny enough, I've heard of the strategy. Obviously, it's come up in the past, but I never knew it was the Clyward Piven strategy. I have thus been educated today. Jan came on to say this is fascism as defined by Mussolini. Brummy Bird says, I want to reiterate a comment I made earlier. Fake fiat currency is enabling all of this. There is no shortage of money available to service multiple agents, including the immigration industrial complex. Great term, says Brummy Bird. I believe the systematic deconstruction of our currencies is part of the wider agenda for this reason. Yes, all roads lead to cashless, no doubt about it. Clark has been on to say, from what Nick is saying, it seems to me that asylum seekers have become a commodity. Funnily enough, Clark, when Nick was speaking, I didn't want to interrupt him, but trafficking came to mind. I mean, this is human trafficking, isn't it? This is the legalisation of human trafficking. We will lobby for the law to be changed to allow us to buy up buildings, declare those buildings to be immigration centres, get massive tax breaks in return for creating a new immigration centre, and then also lobby politicians to allow more asylum seekers into the country. I mean, when you put it like that, it is human trafficking. What else is it, you know?